So this Bitcoin price chart over here and the Bitcoin dominance chart over here could predict that the altcoin market is still going to get one more major correction to the downside. And even though we're currently in extreme fear territory, again, this indicator is still predicting a major correction here coming for Bitcoin. And I'm going to tell you guys here what this would historically mean for the Bitcoin dominance. Now, we're going to be talking as well and be using different types of charts to come here to a conclusion on to what is potentially going to happen with these altcoins, and it is not looking good. Now, understand guys, I am not really investing too much into altcoins, but I know some of you guys may be invested into it, and so that's going to be the point here exactly of this video. And if you are potentially looking to invest into altcoins, or you want to know what is going to be the actual impact of these altcoins on the Bitcoin market, then watch this video until the end. Now, we have talked about this exact indicator in many of my videos, but if you haven't yet, we're going to give you again a very quick rundown of it. So basically what you can see that every single Bitcoin bear market, you would see about an 80% correction to the downside. And that is what this chart right over here shows. So you can see right over here, the Bitcoin price corrected 76%. Right over here, it went to this line. This was about 80%. Then in this Bitcoin bear market, it was about 2% right over here, again, exactly to the same line, and all the way in 2012, again, you can see again 80%. Now, using AI, I've actually calculated an uptrend here that we can actually see, and what we can see that in 2011, we saw 93% correction to the downside, in 2015, 86, then 2018, 84, 2022, 77, so we can see that there is a very strong uptrend here in terms of these bear market corrections, and basically we can see that every single one of these bear markets become less extreme over time, but we can see a very interesting, weird anomaly in this trend, and that is that current Bitcoin bear market is only down here about 50%, which means if we are historically going to be looking at the Bitcoin price going here to this very previous level that we've seen the Bitcoin bear market crash, we could go as low as something like 65% or maybe 70% to the downside. Now, we have to take into account, again, and this is a warning that I've said in many of my videos, that this Bitcoin bull market was not as extreme as we've seen in the past, and so we have to keep an eye out on the fact that this may be the Bitcoin bear market bottom, just because this Bitcoin bull market was just not as extreme as we've seen in the past, and so therefore the Bitcoin bear market is also not going to be as extreme. However, there's one more thing that we do have to talk about, and that is that we're only down here 50%. Even in a realistic scenario of only crashing 60%, we are still in a significant Bitcoin bear market. We are still basically following right over here this trend, and we're still not even as close to some of the predictions as low as 70%, for example, and 60% could be kind of there in the middle, where you're not seeing that the Bitcoin bear market is as extreme as we've seen in the past, but maybe 50% is just not enough. Maybe one more correction is about to happen. Now, if we're going to be crashing to 60%, where's that going to take us? From the top all the way right over here, what we can see that it brings us down here to about 50,000 US dollar, which means from the current Bitcoin price perspective point, we're going to be looking at another 22% correction to the downside. Now, how is this eventually going to affect the altcoin market? Because that's why you have been watching this video. Now, what we can see here is that the altcoin market is extremely big. We've seen a lot of these different altcoins, and we've seen a lot of them pumping. For example, specifically in the last bull market, we've seen XRP had a significant rise here to the upside. Now, the reason why this chart is so incredibly important is because every single bear market, what we saw is that XRP crashed all the way down here, right over here, to this exact level. And after that, it went sideways for about approximately 2 years before having a new peak here and then eventually trading here back to the downside. Now, something very specifically about XRP is that you can again see that there's these long periods here of sideways action. Now, a lot of people are expecting that XRP or a lot of these altcoins may be just going suddenly further to the upside if Bitcoin can recover. The problem with this exact thing is that, again, it takes approximately 4 years for some of these altcoins to bottom out and to eventually have a new bull trend. Now, currently what we can see is that we have clearly broken out of this peak. Now, if Bitcoin does indeed move here further to the downside, let's say 60% approximate, and XRP does indeed also move back down here about, let's say it tends to maybe underperform Bitcoin a little bit, let's say move here about 30% to the downside, we move back exactly inside this green area. Now, what we can see is that each and every single one of these bear markets, the actual bottom is slightly higher. So you guys can see that a slightly higher bottom eventually continues, and that we can expect that this trend somehow returns here a little bit. But some of these bear markets in general just being a little bit higher than the previous one. But again, if we come back and crash here about 30%, then we kind of slightly underperform here Bitcoin, we can exactly come back inside this exact range, which means that some of these altcoins may crash here further to the downside. Now, this is again on the bullish side. If we do indeed have an 80% correction or even a 70% correction, we could be looking at some of these altcoins crashing another 50% here to the downside, which means it will definitely trade all the way here inside this green box. Now, specifically why this is so important is even if you hold Bitcoin and you don't hold altcoin or XRP, like I do specifically, I don't really hold that much altcoins. I've been kind of moved away from that all the way since probably about 2019. But what we can see again is that these altcoins can be extremely important in predicting where the Bitcoin price is going to go. So regardless if you hold them or not, they can be important indicators to predict what is actually going to happen with Bitcoin. Now, what we can see again is that this is the current Bitcoin price. We are seeing that Ethereum is significantly underperforming Bitcoin. We see that XRP has outperformed Bitcoin maybe slightly, but again, you would only calculate it here from a specific point. On general, over the longer time frame, it has not, but maybe you could say like, hey, in the last, in the last like 1.5 years, it might has. But again, XRP could trend here further to the downside, and it still has some potential way to go here to deflate. Now, Solana, the same thing. It is still trading here at a very high level, but what we also see, every single Bitcoin bear market, we see a lot of these altcoins going back to their previous bear market, and the same could happen for Solana. We already saw here the same here with the Ethereum, where we see the 2022 bear market right off here, and Ethereum trading awfully close to it. Now, what we actually have to look at right over here is the Bitcoin dominance, because that's going to tell us a lot on if the Bitcoin price indeed has bottomed out. Now, what we can see is that every single Bitcoin bull market is that the Bitcoin dominance has a major correction to the downside. That is exactly what we saw here. We saw a major alt season over here, and we saw a major alt season in 2017. Now, we can see that the actual impact on the Bitcoin dominance decreases here over time. So, for example, this Bitcoin dominance crash right over here was about 63%. Now, this one was a lot smaller. This one was about 45%. Now, this alt season that we actually got in this Bitcoin bull market was absolutely tiny. This was only about a 30% mover to the downside on the Bitcoin dominance, which means that in general, we did not really see a massive alt season. Now, something that is actually very interesting and not a lot of people talk about, that every single Bitcoin bear market bottom, what we saw is that when the bear market eventually bottomed, is we saw a major trend here to the upside here on the Bitcoin dominance. We could see the same thing over here. So when Bitcoin eventually right over here started to bottom out, you guys can see that we saw a major uptrend here in the Bitcoin dominance, and especially around this crash. So very interesting, right before this major crash to the downside here on Bitcoin, we saw that the Bitcoin dominance again had a major move here to the upside. So before the Bitcoin price can really bottom out, we first want to see that the Bitcoin dominance starts to move to the upside. That is going to be a major indication, which means if you currently are rotated into altcoins, what you could potentially be looking at is that if the Bitcoin price is going to start to rally, is that the Bitcoin dominance as well will go up, which means that your altcoins are going to underperform. And again, if the Bitcoin dominance starts moving here to the upside, that could be an indication here that the Bitcoin bear market is ending. But currently, it is going sideways, which still means, hey, if we still have one more correction here to the downside, we could potentially see the Bitcoin dominance spike, and from that point onwards, spike and spike and spike further to the upside. That is what we generally see every single Bitcoin bear market, which makes holding altcoins now extremely uncomfortable. Again, if we look at some of these altcoins like XRP, we can still expect that they are going to deflate a little bit further to the downside. You may actually say that they are still slightly too overvalued here for this Bitcoin bear market to really end. And this could indicate that Bitcoin indeed has also some more time here to really deflate, and we could see one more correction to the downside, moving here to some of these specific key levels like 60 to 70%. Now, again, for Bitcoin holders, it will just be a slight move here to the downside and eventually recover here about, let's say, around October here of this year. So somewhere around next year, you could be looking at the Bitcoin price already being at a significant high level. But again, if you look specifically at the Bitcoin dominance tells us that, yeah, Bitcoin, for example, right over here, did recover in this Bitcoin in those previous bear markets. But you can see that a lot of the money did not flow into altcoins. It was just mostly just Bitcoin that went here to the upside compared to altcoins. We saw eventually at the exact top that some money flew into altcoins. We exactly saw that right over here in these stages over here as well in 2017 and right over here in 2022. We saw that eventually the money flew into altcoins exactly at the top, which means if you're right now holding altcoins, you could be looking at a period of approximately 3 years before Bitcoin eventually pumps out, before that money eventually flows back into altcoins and you see a big altcoin bubble again. Again, it is extremely uncomfortable to be in that, because even if Bitcoin does eventually top out at $200,000 in 4 years, the fact that the previous alt season was just tiny just maybe mean that holding these altcoins, just the actual reward just really isn't there anymore. We already talked on this channel here about the Monero glitch that we actually saw that could potentially destroy Monero. We've already talked here, well, we haven't yet talked about the other altcoins, but again, it may be the time that altcoins are just not going to be that interesting anymore, and most of the altcoins are eventually slowly going to die. But that would be a video for topic for another video. But again, this is specifically just, hey, we still could see a major crash from Bitcoin that is going to absolute wreak havoc onto the altcoins, and we can look historically what has happened on the Bitcoin dominance. And so especially looking at XRP, we can see a major correction still happening. Now again, these things, they can eventually recover. We've seen bubbles in the past here on XRP. I call them bubbles because they go up and they go down. You know, if you believe in it, that's great. If you want to make returns on it, that's great. It's not really my problem. But again, just be warned on what historically has done. I mean, even if you hold them and you believe in them, we cannot ignore the charts. And this is exactly what the charts are telling us. So be warned about that. And that was the end here of the video. Again, thank you guys for watching here the Daily Coin. I try to post a video every single day. So if you're new, make sure to like, subscribe, and I hope to see you guys in my next video. Bye-bye.